David, sit down. Sam's voice cracked through the speaker like glass under pressure. He never spoke like that. Not once in 20 years. Calm, steady, always 2 steps ahead, that was Sam Patel. But right now, my best friend and lawyer sounded like he'd just seen a ghost. I don't know how to tell you this, he continued. But I wasn't sitting. I was standing in the middle of my office, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and my palms sweating against the edges of the manila file spread open on my desk. I didn't need Sam to tell me anything. The proof was already staring back at me in black and white. Transfers. Withdrawals. Forged signatures. Offshore accounts. And one name printed again and again, like a stain across my entire life. Laura. My wife. My chest seized, not with anger, not with grief, but with something worse, a hollow silence, as though my body had forgotten how to feel. David, are you there? Sam's voice cracked again. I swallowed, forcing sound out of my locked throat. I see it, Sam. I'm holding it in my hands. A long pause. Then, I'm sorry, brother. She's been bleeding you dry for months. Maybe years. The words hit harder than any physical blow. For 12 years, Laura had been my anchor, my joy, the woman who once looked at me like I was the only man alive. And now I was holding the knife she'd used to carve me open. The file lay open on my desk, mocking me. Every line item, every signature, every lie was a blade turned backward into my chest. I couldn't breathe. But what gutted me more wasn't the money. It was the memories those documents dragged up, memories that now felt like acid poured over old wounds. Laura. The woman I met at a bookshop on a rainy Thursday. I can still see her standing in the aisle, clutching a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. Her laugh had been the kind that disarmed strangers, light, musical, unforced. When she turned to me, her eyes caught mine and held them like a hook in the gut. That night, we had coffee. By the second date, I was convinced she was the kind of miracle a man gets once in a lifetime. By the third, I was already imagining a future. And for years, she lived up to that fantasy. She made Sunday mornings feel like stolen treasure, her hair messy, her smile sleepy, her legs tucked under her on the couch as we shared pancakes. When my father passed, she held me like I was made of glass, whispering strength into me when I had none left. But now I couldn't look at those moments without suspicion crawling through them. Her laugh. Her warmth. Her tenderness. Were they ever real, or were they just performances in a play where I was the fool and she the master director? My mind clawed back through the past like a desperate man searching a burning house for survivors. And in the smoke, I started seeing signs I had once ignored. That business trip 3 years ago, she insisted on going alone. She said it was networking, but she came back with clothes I had never seen before, designer labels tucked neatly into her suitcase. When I asked, she brushed it off as a gift from a colleague. The late-night phone calls, she said it was her sister, but whenever I entered the room, her voice dropped to a whisper. And the way she used to surprise me with small luxuries, a new watch, an expensive dinner, a weekend getaway. I thought she was generous. Loving. Devoted. But looking at the forged transfers now, I knew she hadn't been spending her money. She'd been spending mine. A sick laugh scraped its way out of my throat. God, I had been blind. David, Sam's voice broke through my spiral. He was still on the line. Listen to me. We'll handle this. But you can't let her know we know yet. Not until we've built the trap. Do you understand? Trap. The word echoed in my skull. For the first time since I opened that file, the silence inside me cracked. Not with grief. Not with panic, but with something sharp and dark that burned hot in my veins. Revenge. The drive home felt like an eternity wrapped in silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened, but I couldn't loosen them. The world outside my windshield blurred, trees, houses, headlights, just colors smeared by fury. Every mile brought me closer to the woman who had gutted me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always, white shutters, porch light glowing soft and warm, the picture of suburban comfort. A lie wrapped in wood and paint. I sat in the car for a full 5 minutes, breathing like a man about to dive underwater with no certainty of surfacing again. Then, with a long exhale, I forced myself out and walked to the door. The second I stepped inside, I was greeted by her voice. "David? That you?" The sound of it almost broke me. Sweet. Familiar. Loving. A knife dipped in honey. She appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her face lighting up like the sun. "You're home early." I was just finishing dinner. For a heartbeat, I wanted to believe her. To believe the woman in front of me was still the Laura I married. But then I remembered the transfers. The signatures. The lawyer's voice saying, "She's been bleeding you dry for months." And I smiled. "Smells amazing," I said, forcing warmth into my tone. Her shoulders relaxed, her own smile widening. She leaned in to kiss me, and I let her, though every nerve in my body recoiled. Her lips on mine felt like poison, and I swallowed it willingly, because Sam was right, she couldn't know. Not yet. At the dinner table, she served me roasted chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, my favorite. She chatted about her day, about a friend she ran into at the store, about how she found a dress on sale she couldn't resist. I nodded. I laughed at the right times. I even reached across the table to squeeze her hand, pretending I was the devoted husband she thought I still was. But inside, my mind was running every word she said through a filter of suspicion. Which friend? Which store? How much did that dress really cost, and whose money paid for it? Every smile she gave me now looked like a mask. Every touch felt like manipulation. Halfway through dinner, I caught her watching me. Her eyes lingered too long, searching. "What's on your mind?" she asked softly. For a terrifying second, I thought she knew. I thought she saw through me, that the trap Sam wanted to set had already collapsed before we'd even built it. But then I forced another smile, stabbing a forkful of chicken. "Just work." Sam called about a new case. "He's stressing me out." The lie slid off my tongue smoother than I expected. And she bought it, nodding sympathetically, squeezing my hand again. God, she had no idea. And that was when I realized something chilling: I was good at this. Better than I thought I'd be. Pretending. Playing her game. Smiling through the poison. If she could act for 12 years, so could I. The difference was, my act would end with her downfall. The first alert came at 2:13 a.m. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and for a brief, foolish second, I thought it was a wrong number, or maybe one of those spam calls that slipped past the filters. But the name flashing across the screen made my chest tighten: Sam Patel. I slipped out of bed with the care of a burglar, tiptoeing past the soft rhythm of Laura's breathing. The hall light buzzed as I closed the door behind me and answered in a whisper. "She touched it," Sam said. No preamble, no hello. Just those 3 words, clipped and hard. My stomach lurched. "You're certain?" The account was accessed from her laptop. Metadata matches. She moved a portion, small enough to make it look like a management fee, but large enough for us to flag. "She's nibbling the bait. Give it a day or two," she'll take a bigger bite. She won't be able to resist. I sank against the wall, phone hot against my cheek. Down the hall, Laura shifted in her sleep. My wife. My thief. The woman who had kissed me goodnight before slipping into dreams while simultaneously stealing the marrow of my life. She's cautious, Sam continued. But caution breeds routine. And routine is how we catch her. Rivera's been tailing her. Our mystery man, Marco. He's real. And he's more than just a consultant. I think he's the one orchestrating the laundering. We just don't know his true name yet. I closed my eyes, the words settling in like stones on my chest. And when we do, then we tie her crimes to him. Build the chain. Nail both of them. The call ended, but sleep never returned to me that night. I sat in the living room with the lamp on, staring at the quiet shapes of furniture that had once been a shared life, and now felt like props in a long-running con. At breakfast, Laura was herself, or at least the version of herself she wanted me to see. She padded across the kitchen in her silk robe, humming faintly, her hair tied up with careless elegance. She poured coffee into my cup before filling her own, a gesture of domestic devotion that made bile rise in my throat. You were up early, she said, casual, her eyes flicking briefly to mine. Couldn't sleep, I replied, forcing a smile. Thinking about work. She leaned across the counter, her robe slipping just enough to look unintentional. Don't overthink, David. That's always been your problem. She gave me a kiss on the cheek before settling with her tablet. The hypocrisy stung. She was calling me a man who thought too much, while she was the one plotting in shadows, siphoning, laundering, playing me for a fool. And yet, I smiled back. Because that was the role I had to play. That afternoon, Sam summoned me to his office. Rivera was already there, his hulking form filling the leather chair, his notebook open. He smelled faintly of tobacco and asphalt. She met Marco again, Rivera said, flipping a page. Same restaurant. Same booth in the corner. I had to use a long lens from across the street, but I got photos. He slid a few across the table. The images were grainy but clear enough, Laura leaning forward, her manicured hand resting on the edge of a wine glass, while across from her sat a man in his late 40s, dark hair, narrow face, glasses that reflected the light. Name? I asked. Not yet. He pays cash, uses prepaid phones. But he slipped once, took a call outside the restaurant without covering his mouth. I recorded a snippet of his voice. We'll run it through databases, see if we get a match. Rivera tapped his pen. He's careful. That makes him dangerous. Sam interjected, his tone precise. Dangerous men slip eventually. All we need is the slip. I stared at the photo of Laura, my wife, smiling across the table at a man who was helping her dismantle me. Her smile wasn't the one she gave me, it was sharper, more alive. And for the first time, I wondered if I was the backup plan, the dull husband funding her real life elsewhere. The thought hollowed me out. As Rivera spoke, my mind unspooled a memory I had buried. It was a year ago. Laura had returned late from a business dinner. Her perfume was stronger than usual, layered over the faint scent of wine. I'd asked how it went, and she'd smiled, brushing me off with, "Oh, you wouldn't know the company." At the time, I had laughed and let it go. Now I realized she had been telling me the truth, too literally. I wouldn't know the company. Marco. Meridian. Larkspur. All the names in the documents Sam had shown me. She had been planting lies in plain sight. I gripped the photo until my knuckles turned white. 2 days later, the second transfer pinged our alerts. This time she had moved a larger sum, splitting it between two accounts. One went to the familiar shell company, the other to an entity Rivera hadn't seen before. "She's expanding," Sam said, leaning over the printout. "This is good. She's confident. And confidence makes people careless." I nodded, though my throat was dry. Each new theft was another knife in my chest, even though we wanted her to keep taking the bait. The paradox gnawed at me, cheering for my wife to rob me so that we could finally destroy her. Sam must have seen the conflict in my eyes, because he leaned closer. "David, I need you to remember something. You're not losing money. Not anymore. Every dollar she moves is a breadcrumb back to her. You're winning. Do you understand? You're winning." I wanted to believe him. But as I drove home that night, gripping the wheel so hard my hands hurt, all I could see was Laura's face at the dinner table, laughing at some joke I'd never hear, her wine glass raised in a toast to my downfall. And in that moment, I swore silently to myself, when this war ended, she would never see the ruin she left behind. She would only see her own reflection in the wreckage. Rivera's voice recording came back with a match 3 days later. The email subject line was short, almost clinical, "Marco identified." I sat in Sam's office when he slid the report across the table. My eyes skimmed the words, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of the life I thought I had. Name, Marcus Delgado. Aliases, Marco, M. Della, Max Rios. Occupation, former financial consultant, suspected of orchestrating international laundering networks. No confirmed arrests. Known for burning his associates once their usefulness ran dry. A vulture in a suit. And Laura had let him perch at our table. Rivera leaned back in his chair, tapping a photograph paper-clipped to the file. It was Marco at an airport terminal, clean-shaven, rolling a modest suitcase. Ordinary. Forgettable. But that was his camouflage. "Your wife's in deep with this one," Rivera said, his tone edged with gravel. "He's not just helping her. He's grooming her. He'll use her as a shield, then drop her the second things get hot." Sam folded his hands. "Which makes our timing crucial. We need to let him think she's useful long enough to expose the pipeline. But not so long that he cuts her loose and vanishes." I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. Grooming her. Using her. The words rattled in my head. For years, I had believed I was the man she leaned on. The thought that she could be enthralled by someone else's schemes, someone else's promises, gnawed at me worse than her betrayal of me alone. That evening, Laura came home late. Her lipstick was darker than usual, and there was a sharpness in her step as if she had been marching to an invisible drumbeat. She poured herself a drink before even acknowledging me, then turned with a smile too quick, too polished. "How was your day?" "Uneventful," I lied, masking the knowledge burning in my pocket. "And yours?" She shrugged, settling on the couch. "Meetings. Calls. The usual chaos." But she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the glass down. For the first time, I saw the crack in her mask, a flash of nerves beneath the confidence. She was juggling too much. Even she knew it. I almost pitied her. Almost. As I watched her, another memory surfaced. Years ago, when we were just starting out, she had convinced me to take a loan for her business idea. A boutique marketing firm, she called it. "It'll be ours, David. Our future." I'd signed the papers without question. Later, I learned she had used half of it to pay off debts I never knew she had. When I confronted her, she laughed, kissed me, and said, "See? I fixed the problem without you ever feeling the weight of it." Back then, I'd mistaken manipulation for charm. Now, I recognized the pattern. She had always been testing how much she could take before I broke. Rivera's tale followed Laura and Marco again, this time to a boutique hotel downtown. Not a restaurant. Not a public meeting. A private suite on the 12th floor. He reported back grimly. They weren't just talking numbers. He had a laptop. She was handing over documents. Contracts. Access logs. Sam swore under his breath. She's giving him keys, not breadcrumbs. My chest felt like it had caved in. What does that mean? It means, Sam said, turning to me, if he consolidates those documents, he can move faster than we anticipated. He won't just siphon. He'll gut you. And once he does, she's disposable. Rivera leaned forward. The clock just sped up. We need to tighten the trap before Delgado bolts. That night, I stood by the window, city lights flickering like embers. Laura was asleep in the other room, her phone clutched loosely in her hand. I could hear the faint buzz of incoming messages, Marco, no doubt, whispering instructions into the dark. Sam's words replayed in my head, every dollar she moves is a breadcrumb back to her. You're winning. But winning didn't feel like this. Winning didn't feel like watching your own wife dissolve into the hands of a predator while you sat powerless, waiting for the right moment. So I made a decision. The trap wouldn't just close around Laura and Marco. It would crush them. Both. I didn't care about legal procedures or calculated patience anymore. I wanted them to feel the ground fall from beneath their feet, to taste the panic of realizing their empire was built on quicksand. And for that, I would need to get closer to Laura than ever before. Closer than Marco himself. I learned to breathe like a liar. It began as small things, the deliberate sighs, the practiced softness in my voice, the casual touch at a moment when she expected it. I became the husband I used to be on cue, warm, untroubled, grateful, until the act felt less like theater and more like a second skin. If she suspected anything, she never let it show. But she watched me closely, the way a gambler watches the dealer's hands. Sam had given me a new role to play, accomplice. Not in crime, but in the illusion of ease. If Laura thought I trusted her, she would be careless. If she was careless, she would slip. So I smiled in places it hurt. I laughed at jokes that felt hollow. I even suggested investment tweaks in the conversations she steered, nudging her to take small steps we could watch. The first week was the hardest. I had to swallow the urge to tear down the curtains and show her the ledger of lies. Instead, I complimented the way she'd refitted the study, asked after the client she mentioned, and listened while she talked about Marco in that conspiratorial half-voice she reserved for people who made her feel clever. Each time she said his name, my stomach folded inward like a paper fortune teller. Her defenses were subtle. When she left her laptop on the kitchen counter, an accidental, careless thing, I kept my hands in my pockets and told myself not to move. The temptation to rifle through her files, to pry open the door she'd closed on our life, was like an animal tugging at a chain. Sam's voice echoed in my head, no. We do this clean. We gather proof. We wait for the whole picture. So I watched instead. I watched the way she composed herself before calls from Marco, the way she tapped a rhythm on the desk when she typed into a secure portal, the way she hid documents inside innocuous folders named recipes and garden plans. I found myself sitting a little later in the study, ostensibly to check email, really to be near the hum of her world. When she carried paperwork to the dining room and spread it out like an artist's palette, I pretended to read the same budget projections she'd shown me in passing yet never fully explained. It was during one of those feigned readings that the opportunity came. "Can you help me sign this?" she asked one evening, eyes bright with practiced exhaustion. "Just a routine signature for the LLC. They want a co-signer on a vendor contract. It's nothing." Her hand trembled barely enough to be believable. The document was on thin, official paper. The block for my signature was formal, not the power of attorney kind, but one that would grant access to specific accounts if paired with a corporate resolution. My heart thudded in my throat like a drum. Sam had warned me that she'd begin to ask for logistical things, little administrative acts that would let her move money with less scrutiny. This was one of them. I took the pen with the same careful, unremarkable movements I'd used my entire life. The stroke of my name felt like signing a check for my own disappearance. I held the ink and did not press down. "I'll sign after I read it," I said softly. "Let me look it over, honey." She hesitated, the lie and the need colliding in the briefest play of expression. "It's fine, David. Really. I just need your signature. I swear it's routine." Routine. The word had curled into the margins of our marriage for years. I saw it now as a sleight of hand. I set the document aside without touching it and wrapped my fingers around her hand. "Let me help you check it properly. I want to be sure. That's all." The relief that washed over her face was almost immediate, a smoothing of lines, a softening of the shoulders. She slid into my lap as if to close the distance between us, and I let her, because distance would have killed the plan. She talked about Marco then, the way people talk when they're enamored with a dangerous idea, low, feverish, convinced of a future built on decisions they can't explain. That night, after she went to bed, I slipped the unsigned contract into an envelope and drove it to Sam. We compared it with other documents we'd subpoenaed. Forensics would be able to tell in the end whether it had been signed willingly, whether the ink had been applied in pressure matching my hand. For now, the document was a test. Would she push me to sign without reading? Would she get sloppy? She did not push that far, not yet. But she did accelerate other moves. Marco's communications became briefer and more urgent. Rivera reported a transfer to a collector account overseas, routed through Meridian. A painting that I'd once admired at a gallery, a grotesque, modern canvas I'd envied for its audacity, showed up on their social feed as the latest edition. My photographs of family milestones appeared in frames around a home that was increasingly staged, a showroom for purchases that should have come from a different life. At work, I began to manipulate my schedule subtly. On days when Rivera had intel about a meeting between Laura and Marco, I'd forget a conference so I could be home under the pretense of a surprise. I learned to answer questions with lightness and deflection, the way a professional actor botches a line to keep the scene moving. If she asked why I was home, I said I had a migraine. If she wanted to know why I'd read an account statement, I shrugged and called it idle curiosity. There were nights when my throat tightened with shame. I would lie awake and remember the way she'd supported me when my father died, the quiet nights she'd held a heating pad against my back when I'd pulled a muscle in the yard. Those things had been real once, I told myself. Real and complicated, layered atop the deceit she'd constructed later. Love and betrayal are not mutually exclusive, they can coexist like rust on a once bright car. My mind kept inventory of both. And then the gamble paid off. Rivera called in a whisper one rain-soaked evening. He'd managed to get a clear photo of Marco leaving a storage unit under a false name. In the glove compartment of his car. A small flash drive. Rivera believed the flash drive contained ledger files, a list of transfers, accounts, and a chain of command that would make the bank trails look like a child's game. "He's sloppy tonight," Rivera said. He left the unit's keypad unlocked. There was rain. He moved faster than he should have. He's getting sloppy from confidence. Or he's getting sloppy because someone's narrowing the circle. Sam's voice through the line was a machine calibrating triumph. We take the drive. We analyze. If Marco uses it, if it's his ledger, we have what we need to prosecute. But the question remained, how to get the drive without alerting Marco or Laura. We couldn't just seize it without precedent, that would send both of them scattering. We needed a plausible way to have it surface, a way that let us tie the ledger back to the transactions she'd made through Meridian and Larkspur. I can get it, I said before I thought, the sentence escaping like breath. I can get close. I can be there when he drops it, or when she goes for it. I can intercept. Silence answered for a moment, then Rivera snorted softly. You're volunteering to take a walk on the razor's edge, old man. Someone has to, I said. I'll do it. Sam's hesitation was audible. David, if they suspect you. They won't suspect me, I cut in. They think I'm a shadow. That's my advantage. It was a thin reed to rest upon, but sometimes the thinnest reed will hold a man if he stands perfectly still. The plan that followed involved a web of small deceits. Rivera would stage an incident near the storage facility, a broken-down car, a woman who needed help, the sort of coincidence the guilty often mistake for natural order. I would be the passerby who graciously offered assistance, present when Marco fled and left a flash drive behind in his haste. The drive would appear to have been lost in the chaos. Marco would believe it destroyed or inaccessible. But Rivera and Sam would recover it. And once they had it, forensics would work their slow, steady miracles. It sounded dangerous. It was dangerous. But I had grown accustomed to the thin hairs of fear that prickled my skin. I had learned to steady my hands when the city trembled beneath me. On the night we set the trap, I stood in the rain, coat collar turned up, heart a steady drum. Laura had kissed me on the cheek before leaving for an evening with clients, her perfume warm against my skin. I watched her go with a calm I'd manufactured in the mirror 5 minutes prior. As Rivera's plan unfolded and the stage was set, I felt, oddly, alive. The life that had been stolen from me was flickering with possibility, not because I would reclaim money, but because I might reclaim agency. For the first time since the file had landed on my desk, revenge felt not like a hollow desire but like a tool I could use to carve out justice. Close enough to strike, I thought, and meant it. The storage unit smelled of dust and rusted hinges, the kind of place where forgotten lives went to rot. Rivera's flashlight cut across stacks of boxes labeled with Laura's looping handwriting, old tax returns, holiday decorations, charity items. But in the back, beneath a tarp that smelled faintly of mothballs, was a fireproof safe. Rivera cracked it in minutes, muttering, she should have spent less on jewelry and more on locks. Inside was a small black case. And inside that case, a single flash drive. Rivera slipped it into a forensic laptop he'd brought. The screen filled with folders. Names. Dates. Bank logos. Shell companies I'd never heard of. And in the middle of it all, a series of encrypted ledgers tied to Marco Delgado's network. Jesus, Rivera whispered. She's not a pawn. She's a partner. The weight of those words sat like lead in my chest. My wife hadn't just been led astray. She was building this empire with him. Sam's voice was taut with urgency. This is enough to put her in federal court. But if we wait, if we let her keep feeding him, we can pull Marco in too. Nail them both. Rivera shook his head. That's a dangerous gamble. Delgado doesn't stay still. If he sniffs heat, he'll burn her and vanish. This flash drive proves she's dirty. Do we really need more? They both turned to me. In that dim unit, surrounded by cardboard ghosts of my marriage, I realized the power had shifted. For months I'd been reacting, discovering betrayal, following their lead, choking down rage. Now the decision was mine. Expose Laura now, and she alone would crumble. Or hold, and drag Marco into the grave with her. I thought of Eleanor's photo on the entryway table. Of the home Laura had hollowed out while smiling at me over breakfast. Of the years stolen, the future I'd mapped stone by stone. We take them both, I said, my voice steady. No half measures. Sam leaned in. Then we orchestrate her next move. We'll dangle a final transfer, make it look like you're liquidating the last safe account. She'll run it straight to him. When she does, federal enforcement will already be waiting. Rivera zipped the laptop shut. Then we'd better move fast. Delgado's pattern is exit and burn. If he thinks the well's running dry, he'll torch her without warning. Sam looked at me, his expression grave. Are you ready for her to know? Once this begins, there's no going back. No pretending. No dinners. No smiles. Only exposure. I stared at the black case in Rivera's hand. That little drive, smaller than a cigarette lighter, contained the rot of everything I'd believed in. Yes, I said. Let her know. Let him know. Let them both choke on it. That night, Laura came home flushed, restless, pacing the living room like a caged animal. She poured wine but barely touched it. They've been pressing me, she muttered, more to herself than to me. Deadlines moving faster. I need to finish this. I watched her, the performance slipping. She wasn't the composed wife anymore. She was a conspirator drowning in tides she couldn't control. I almost told her then. Almost threw the flash drive on the coffee table and asked how many pieces of me she'd sold. But Sam's warning held me back. One more play. One more step, and the trap would close forever. Rivera's tail picked up Marco again 2 nights later. This time, he wasn't smiling. He was checking his rear view, burning documents in a steel bin behind the hotel. Delgado's spooked, Rivera reported. He knows something's off. You've got one window, David. If you don't bait him now, he'll vanish. The urgency crystallized in me. The war was no longer abstract. It was hours, maybe days, from breaking open. And I would be there, standing at the fault line when it cracked. The last week moved with a speed that felt unreal, as if the city itself had leaned in to watch the end of our private play. Sam coordinated with a federal task force he'd quietly brought into the loop, clean, experienced agents who didn't kiss the ring of sentiment. Rivera tightened his tail on Marco until the man's movements were a litany on a map. And I practiced my face in the mirror until the muscles forgot the tremor beneath. The bait was ready. Sam had arranged for a controlled liquidation of what remained of a supposedly isolated investment fund, a plausible, urgent transfer that would look like the last chance to move assets before a market swing. It was a chunk large enough for Laura to taste the windfall, but not so large it would set off every bank alarm in the world. The money would route through a chain we controlled in part and monitored in part. Meridian would be a waypoint she trusted, Marco would be the conduit, and the final move would trigger the subpoenas we'd already planted. If all went according to plan, agents would be watching the receiving accounts, surveillance would catch the handoffs, and by the time anyone knew what happened, Delgado would be holding a suitcase of evidence he couldn't shred. I walked through the choreography in my head a dozen times. Dinner with Laura, casual. A casual mention of moving funds in a way that sounded reactive to market news, a text from Sam's alias encouraging the transfer. She would nudge Marco. Marco would make his move to consolidate. Rivera would intercept him at the storage facility or the hotel, wherever he was most vulnerable. The task force would execute the arrests quietly and cleanly. What if they bolt? I asked Sam the night before, my voice small and brittle in his office. Then we cut off their paths, Sam said. He tapped the table with a steady finger. We close exits. We have aviation flagged, accounts frozen. There's nowhere professional money launderers like Delgado can go that the feds can't follow. We just have to be patient for the precise moment. Patience was a blade I now held with two hands. We staged the move for a Thursday evening, when Rivera had sightlines on Marco's known haunts and the task force had agents staged in unmarked cars. I made sure to be home early, the ritual of civility practiced down to a fine art. Laura arrived later than usual, hair smoothed, eyes bright with the kind of adrenaline that precedes dishonesty. "Big news at work," she said, as she kissed me. "There's an opportunity to liquidate some of my holdings. We should think about reallocating." She sounded casual. Her tongue betrayed nothing. We ate as if this were any other night, her talking through numbers and hypothetical returns, me nodding and inserting the innocuous comments Sam had scripted. At one point, she leaned in and touched my wrist. "David, are you sure you don't want me to handle this?" she asked, voice soft, implying trust and begging for it at once. "I trust you," I said, because I had to. It felt like a lie that kept me alive. When she excused herself to take a call, Marco, no doubt, I held my breath. The message Sam had prepped for me went out at 9:13 p.m. from an account that looked legitimate. "Hey, I think now's the window. I moved funds to the fund we discussed. Check details when you can." It was anonymous, it was plausible, and it was bait. Within 40 minutes, the monitors pinged. She moved it, Rivera hissed into my ear through a secure line. She routed it through Meridian. "Delgado is on the move." I climbed into an unmarked car with Rivera and a plainclothes agent. The rain had started again, the city lights streaming in rivulets down the windshield. The air tasted like ozone and metal. My hands were locked in a rigid calm. "You sure about this?" Rivera asked, eyes hard. "As sure as I can be." At the storage facility, the lights were low. Rivera's men shadowed the perimeter while an agent kept eyes on the hotel where Marco met clients. A van idled down the street, its engine a quiet purr. We were all ghosts in a city that still slept. Something about watching a man you once loved be included in this kind of operation makes every muscle rise. When we approached the unit where Rivera had last seen Marco, a figure stepped out into the rain with a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. He moved quickly, head down, hood up, as if the world were merely an object to pass by. "Move," Rivera whispered. The agents flowed like water, a practiced, silent geometry. One agent blocked the exit, another moved to intercept the messenger while Rivera and I took the flank. Delgado saw the movement and panicked. He bolted. The bag slipped from his shoulder in the scramble. An agent dove, snagging it and sending the flash drive skittering across the wet concrete. Delgado tried to run and a plainclothes cop took him down with a tackle that made him curse in a language I didn't recognize. The arrests were swift. Delgado's hands went behind his back as an agent read him his rights, the words sounding unreal in the night. I stood there in soaking clothes, the rain slicing my cheeks, and watched a man I'd seen only in photos be cuffed like a common thief. He looked up, furious and astonished, and his eyes flashed with a recognition that made something turn in my gut. He had underestimated the man he'd used the way Laura had underestimated me. Rivera handed me the messenger bag. Inside, the leather sat damp, a dozen envelopes saturated with water and swollen with ink. Among them was a small notebook, a ledger in Marco's hand, with accounts and routing numbers and coded names that matched the flash drive's content. We had it all, the chain, the evidence, the conduit. But the night was not done. News travels fast in the net of people who run dirty money. By the time the agents closed in on Marco, whispers had already reached Laura. She paced in our living room, phone clenched, voice thin with panic when she finally spoke. They took him, she said, more statement than question. Her breath came shallow. Someone tipped them. They were waiting. You stay calm, I said, my voice controlled like a metronome. I had rehearsed these words. Sam's on it. We'll handle it. She stared at me then, and for the first time since the file had landed on my desk, the mask split. How could they? Who? Her voice cracked. David, did you? The air between us chilled. It felt like the thin glass of the world settling into recognition. I didn't tip anyone, I said at last. But we've been following the trail for months. The truth slid out, not as I'd planned but as necessity demanded. Sam brought the feds in. We had to be precise. We had to catch him with the ledger, not just a rumor. She sank onto the couch, hands clutched, eyes bright with panic. You set me up, how could you? Her voice rose, then dropped to a hollow whisper. David, you had to know. You knew. I could see the ricochet of betrayal across her face, the shock, the dawning terror. What she didn't expect was the look that followed. Not triumph, but a tired acceptance, the look of a man who had been prepared for this for too long. You did this for months, she said, voice small and damaged. All this time. All this time, I echoed. Why? Her question was a small animal, raw and exposed. To stop you, I said. The answer was so simple it felt monstrous. To stop him. To stop you. To stop the theft. To stop the lie. For a moment, she looked like she might explode with rage. Instead, she went very still, the only movement a twitch in her jaw. We're not done, I said, because Sam had told me the job wasn't finished until the paperwork was sealed and the money frozen. They'll trace the accounts. The task force will move on the foreign transfers. You'll have a chance to explain it in front of people who can't be swayed by your face. That's where this ends. She laughed then, a sound that lived somewhere between hysteria and grief. Explain. Explain what? That I saved your life by managing things. That I protected us. No, I said. Explain why you took everything. She looked at me for a long, dangerous beat. You don't understand, she whispered. You never did. You think this is all about money. It's not. It's about options. Freedom. Her eyes were wild now. He makes me feel powerful. He makes me feel seen. The words were a blade. Not because they were untrue but because they were true about a shard of her I'd always hoped was only a fantasy. She had found a man who gave her something I had not, and she'd sold our life for it. The phone on the coffee table chimed with a message. Rivera's face, in the small preview, told the final piece, Delgado detained. Ledger secured. Agents moving on foreign accounts. The net was tightening like a fist. Laura's face crumpled. The bravado drained away. She looked suddenly like someone who'd been stripped by a current and left on the riverbank to watch her life float by. They took Marco in cuffs. They did not arrest Laura that night. The task force needed time to process the ledger, to trace the wires, to coordinate with overseas partners. But the implication hovered like a storm cloud. She sat across from me, hands folded, and finally let herself sob, a thin, ragged sound that punctured the night. I felt a strange hollowness when she cried. It wasn't the catharsis of revenge, it was the absence of what I had loved, the missing human that had been swallowed and distorted by greed. Sam called at midnight. We're not done, but Delgado's in custody. The ledger's a smoking gun. We'll wait for the prosecutors, but we have what we need. His voice was careful, as if speaking too loudly might jolt the fragile balance. Will they go after her? I asked. They will investigate. There's a lot to untangle with international routing. For now, keep the house calm. Don't say anything to anyone. Let the federal people do their work. I looked at Laura then, at the woman who had laughed at a painting purchased with money that wasn't hers to spend, at the woman who had used flecks of kindness as cover for thievery. She had once been the center of my world. Now she was a figure in a tableau of ruin. You should sleep, I said finally. You'll need your strength. She stared at me, confusion and pain etched into every line. For what? She whispered. For whatever comes next, I said. And I knew, with a clarity that felt like a verdict, that whatever came next would not simply be about money. It would be about unraveling the life she'd built on top of mine, about the faces of people she'd used, about the capacity for a person to reinvent cruelty as necessity. Outside, the city hummed on, ordinary and indifferent. Inside our house, the lights were low and the rain tapped a steady rhythm against the window. The war had reached a decisive strike. Delgado was in custody, the ledger was in our hands, and the federal machinery was grinding toward prosecution. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel, the cool slide of momentum. The plan had worked. But what victory would look like remained unclear. Would the law make me whole? Would public exposure take from me the last of the dignity I had left? Or would it simply replace one kind of ruin with another? There were no simple answers. Only the slow, relentless work of the aftermath. The federal building smelled of paper and disinfectant, the kind of sterile air where lives were dismantled quietly behind closed doors. I sat across from a panel of prosecutors while Sam handed over the flash drive and a sealed folder. This, he said, tapping the folder, is the complete trail. Laura Davenport and Marcus Delgado. Money transfers, shell companies, falsified contracts. Delgado's already in custody. Now it's about leverage. The lead prosecutor, a woman with steel gray eyes, leaned forward. You're willing to testify? I hesitated. Testify meant standing in front of strangers and carving open my marriage for the world to pick apart. But I pictured Eleanor, my daughter's face framed in sunlight, and the answer came without doubt. Yes. They didn't arrest her at home. They waited until she stepped out of her office the following Tuesday, briefcase in hand, that same manufactured smile on her lips. Rivera was there. He told me later how her face shifted when the agents closed in. At first confusion, then indignation, then that flicker of raw fear she could never quite mask. By the time she called me from holding, her voice was stripped bare. No charm. No spin. Just a whisper. David, you did this? I didn't answer. The silence was enough. Weeks bled into months. Delgado cut a deal, of course. Men like him always do, trading information for reduced sentences. But even with his cooperation, the prosecutors had more than enough to bury Laura. Every morning I read the filings. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Money laundering. Words that turned my wife into a case number. She tried, through her lawyer, to reach me. Letters, carefully phrased apologies, pleas for mercy. I didn't read past the first line. The woman I had married no longer existed. And whatever this version of her was, it belonged to the court now. Sometimes at night I dreamed of our wedding. Laura standing at the altar, eyes glistening, promising forever. For better or worse. The dream always fractured on that line. I woke up sweating, tasting the irony like blood in my mouth. The night before the trial began, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the empty chair where Laura used to sit. I thought of all the mornings we'd shared coffee there, the laughter that once filled the space. And then I thought of the flash drive. The hotel meetings. Marco's hand on her back. The smirk in her voice when she lied to me. Eleanor padded into the room, sleepy-eyed, clutching her blanket. "Daddy, are you okay?" I knelt, pulling her close. "I am now," I whispered. And for the first time in months, I believed it. When the trial opened, I sat in the back row of the courtroom. Laura entered in a gray suit, wrists shackled, her beauty dimmed but not gone. She scanned the room until her eyes found mine. For a moment, I thought she might mouth something, an apology, a plea. Instead, she dropped her gaze to the floor. That was the last time I saw her. The verdict would come weeks later. Guilty on all counts. But for me, the verdict had already been written the moment I chose to fight back. Months after the trial, I stood outside my daughter's school, sunlight warming my face. Life hadn't magically healed, there were still nights when betrayal pressed heavy on my chest. But there was space now. Breathing room. Eleanor ran into my arms, laughing, her backpack bouncing. And in that laughter, I found something Laura and Marco had never been able to steal, the certainty that I had survived. Not just survived, endured. And endurance, I realized, was its own kind of revenge.